Hey everybody, Cole here with Classic Mini DIY, and today we are going to be rebuilding our carburetors. We're basically going to be bringing this dirty, crusty old HS2 and we are going to make it nice and pretty and clean, as well as replacing a lot of the leaking parts along the bottom and some of the internals as well. This is a pretty straightforward process. You can pick up these SU rebuild kits. I got this from 7 Mini Parts, and this is for a dual HS2 kit, but they have ones for a single HS2 if you have that. I don't imagine you would. A single HS4, dual HS2, all sorts of different kits. Check them out. They're affordable and they come with pretty much everything you would need to perform a proper, rebuild on a carburetor. Now at the same time, I'm also going to be putting these into an ultrasonic parts cleaner. I've never done this before, so this is a learning experience for me, but I'm going to be using a solution that comes with that ultrasonic cleaner. I'll get to that in a little while, but it'll be to kind of freshen this up, degrease things, and get them really nice and pretty, hopefully. We shall see how that all pans out. Now before we get started, just 2 things. One, I have a giveaway going on right now for these Venom Steel gloves. They are incredible. The giveaway is going to select 5 different people, and each one of those people is going to win a box of 500 of these nitrile gloves, which is pretty exciting. If you're interested in signing up for that or entering into that, there's a link in the description below. And these nitrile gloves, one of the coolest things about them is that nitrile is in fact recyclable. So cool. Second thing is I also launched a new t-shirt design. It is the Classic Mini Project Illustrated. You can pick those up on the merch store, and I've got lots more colors coming in. If you guys have a color that you want me to include, post them in the comment section, and I will be sure to try and get that combination put together for you guys so you can pick it up for your car. Now, let's dive into these carburetors, and I will show you guys what we need to do. All right, so first up, let's take a look at these carburetors. Now to give you just a small background, these are SU carburetors. These are the HS2 variety, which means they are 1¼ inch big inlets here. And these are kind of the smaller of those carburetors, but combined in a dual setup like this, you do get some really nice low-end torque and a nice little peppy engine. So I am actually gonna keep these for right now. I might do something fun in the future. I've been kind of tossing around the idea of putting a motorcycle carburetor on the Mini, but that's way in the future. For right now, the main thing I want to do is get these things cleaned. I want to get this stuff all kind of taken apart, and so we can put this back together with some of these newer, fancier, cleaner parts that we have here. Now, in order to do that, we're going to have to start taking this stuff apart. Now, I would love to tell you guys that I'm a carburetor expert and I know exactly how these things go together and come apart, but I don't really know a ton about carburetors, so this is going to be kind of a learning experience for both of us. Basically, whenever you're taking something apart like this, you're going to want to take your time and set aside the parts. So all of these little screws, are for the SU float bowls, and then once we start diving deeper into this stuff, we're going to want to take note of how we're taking this stuff apart. In my case, I have the benefit of having a camera set up on these things, so if I forget, I'll be able to easily, look back at that footage. But if you don't, I would encourage you to set up a cell phone, something like that, or take pictures of the way that these look before you take them apart. That way you don't forget, that way you don't end up missing something, yada, yada, yada. You're gonna thank yourself if you do that. So first off, let's go ahead and take off our dash pots, and then we're also gonna wanna take off our float bowls here. So first things first, these most likely will have oil in them. Now, when you take these little spring plunger things out, you're going to want to set this off to the side. That actually looks like it's in good shape. But when you take those out, you might lose some oil. As you can see, I've already started to lose a little bit of oil here. And you're going to want to get a rag, something like that, to catch this oil. I'm going to use a little plastic tray I have laying around here. Now this kit does come with a plethora of new gaskets. I have new gaskets already, but I am probably going to go ahead and use these and then keep a bunch of spares. One of the ones that I want to call out that's always a pain, and I would recommend actually having these at your house most of the time. They're really inexpensive and they tear frequently and they break, and it's just worth having. This is a SU float bowl gasket. It goes right around your float here, and having these around is totally worth it because these things have a tendency to leak and tear, so having them around is good. Now what it looks like we have here is a new hose that runs along the bottom here from your float bowl over into the actual carburetor. You have your jet here. I'm pretty sure this is called a jet. And then you have new spring and gasket kits for that. So that actually sits down like that. All these springs and gaskets replace all of this stuff right down here at the bottom of the carburetor. And then you have this new little like SU bowl float engagey thingy mabobber. No idea what this is called, but from what I understand, that actually goes in right here underneath your float bowl. Let's see if I can get a good shot of that for you. So you can see that right inside that float bowl there. It's this little metal thing, and it gets replaced with what's in this bag right here. You can see, there you go. All right, so let's disassemble one of these things. So first things first, we need a flathead screwdriver to take off that dash pot. There we go. Now the dash pot will come off, and it's actually got a little spring, and by little I mean this enormous, small, thin spring, and this is what actually allows your float to move up and down inside that chamber. This right here is your float, pretty cool, and then your needle is on the end of that float. So the short of how this works is you have a jet inside your carburetor right here. See that little teeny hole? And this needle actually goes down into that hole. And as air is sucked into the motor, this starts to rise up, and as the needle gets smaller and smaller, it's going to allow more and more fuel to pass into the carburetor, and thus, as you can see here with this valve like that, that is going to allow more fuel to go into your motor as well as air, so your air-fuel mixture, and then your car runs. I mean, that's kind of the short of it. There's obviously a little bit more to it than that, but that kind of covers the main things. Now, you've obviously got all these linkages and springs and various things here. So this right here is your actual choke. So what happens is when you pull your choke up, it's actually kind of setting the baseline for your jet. So when you pull that down, it's kind of allowing that to be open a little bit more to let more fuel in when there is not necessarily more air in there. Now the other one is your throttle, and that is simply actuating that valve inside the carburetor there, as you can see, and that allows more air in and allows more fuel in. It's really not that complicated, this whole linkage setup and everything, but a lot of people can get kind of overwhelmed with this. Understandably, it looks really, really complicated. The next thing we're going to do is disassemble the clutch, arm here, the actuating arm. And to do that, we just need to use our Phillips screwdriver and undo it. All right, so now as you can see here, my jet has become loose, and we might be able to pull that out. Doesn't quite look like it. So we're going to have to undo the bottom of this float bowl here. And that's pretty simple stuff. We're just going to loosen that up with a wrench. Now, for some reason, that bolt was 11 millimeters. It was not 7/16. It's a little bit strange to me because my understanding was all of this stuff was standard, not metric. Now you may notice I just switched what I was doing. And instead of taking this off first, what I'm going to do is disconnect the actual bowl itself from the carburetor. And that can be done via this bolt right here. This runs from the side of the carburetor that's kind of inwards inside your car and out through this and into your float bowl. It actually mounts it on there. There's also a rubber or plastic little thingy here. And what that does is it actually creates the correct angle for this float bowl to sit perfectly upright when it sits in your car, even though this is at an angle. So let's take that off. And our float bowl has been removed. So we can take a quick second here to compare these jets. Now, As you can see here, we got our float bowl and an old jet here, and this has a rubber hose. I have no idea if there's anything metal in there. I can't see it at the moment. But then we have our new one with this kind of like bendy metal, very nice, bronze or copper or something jet right here, and then our regular end there. That is a really nice looking replacement. I'm looking forward to getting this cleaned and then this new one on there. That's gonna look really good. So now I'm gonna go ahead and finish removing this hose here from the bottom that connects the bowl to the jet. So now we have the jet spring and adjustment screws and nuts, all that stuff very accessible. And let's take a look at how all of this comes apart. So first you have a very tiny washer that comes off of there. Oh, also keep in mind, this right here is a washer. It's very special for your float bowl angle doohickey, and you'll just want to keep those together. Set that off to the side. Yeah. We have our adjustment screws for our jet. So you have your locking bolt nut at the bottom here, a spring, and then one on the top that's actually the one you use to adjust how low or high this jet sits by default, I guess you could say. Mine you can spin by hand. Whether that's good or bad, I'm not really sure, but we can take that off. And then the next thing, we're going to take this nut off the bottom to actually remove the retaining ring here. It doesn't look like the SU kit comes with a replacement one for that, but that's okay. It's not like make or break in this situation, but we can get that off. Now here again, we found a metric nut for some reason. This just goes to show you that even if you believe your car is all standard old parts, you might find that something isn't quite right. There we go. So now what we're looking at here is the whole assembly. So we've got our replacement parts here. I can go ahead and pull those out and I can show you how these are all going to get replaced in this. All right, so we will be reusing a few of the parts here. And what we can see here is we've got our original washer that was on the very bottom. And then we have our adjustment nut. This is going to allow us to adjust the base level of the springed float system. And then we have our new spring. We're going to have this big washer here that is going to sit against this retaining nut. It's going to help create a nice tight seal. And then we have a brand new washer for our jet centering device. I'm pretty sure that's what this is called. So your jet slides right up in there, just like that, moves up and down. Pretty straightforward. So if I didn't say any of that stuff right, feel free to correct me in the comment section below. I'm sure you guys will. And, you know, keep me honest with this stuff because I, like I said, am not a carburetor expert. Now, we also have our needle assembly here. I think for the electrosonic cleaner, I'm going to go ahead and just leave this assembled. I don't think I'm going to take that apart. Everything looks to be in good shape based on my limited knowledge. Now the next thing that you just saw that I did here was take a small pin, there you go, that's in focus. This small pin goes into this little float bowl system here. Let's get that in focus. That gets pressed in. One side of it actually has some ridges to hold it in place, and that holds your actual float bowl in. So that sits like so. And with your fuel system, it's constantly pushing pressure to this. And once your float bowl is full, it presses on the valve right up here and holds the valve shut so no more fuel can get pushed into your float bowl. But sometimes these things get worn down or they just stop working as effectively. They get dirty, kind of things like that. Or somebody like me drops it when they take it apart. So we're going to set this off to the side and we're going to be replacing that as well. Now, conceptually, the way this works, it's got a small pointy end and that goes inside there. And then with that, this side is now pretty much ready for a cleaning. All right, so the next thing that we're gonna do is get our parts cleaner. In my case, this is an ultrasonic cleaner. Never used this before, so we're gonna give this a shot. But we're gonna get this, we're gonna fill it up with our solution. In my case, I am using a Turbosonic concentrated cleaner, and it looks like I'm gonna have to do this in 2 steps because I can't fit all the carb parts in one basket. But one will go down in here, set that down in, it'll run, cook those, ultrasonic them, whatever it does, and then we can come back and do the second wave. I might even need to split this up into 3 based on how much space I have in here. Not the end of the world, just means a little bit more time in order to get these all clean. All right, so the way that this works is with this cleaner, 2 ounces to 20 ounces ratio of fluid. So I've got paint mixing things that I got when I was doing the painting on the car, and I've kind of spaced them out. They all have 20 ounces in them, so now I can mix this equally into all of these to make sure I have the right ratio of cleaning fluid. Now let's test dip this, make sure everything's totally submerged. Looks like I still need a little bit more fluid in here, so let's go get a little bit more water. Now, based on what I read on the internet, they are saying that this needs to be set to about 60 degrees Celsius, and it needs to run for about 15 to 20 minutes. So I'm gonna plug it in, I'm gonna press all the buttons over here and make it do what it needs to do, and then we will check back in about 15 minutes. All right, maybe 3rd check's the charm? Let's find out. The water is certainly a lot warmer now. It's up to 44 Celsius. I have no idea what that is in freedom temperature, but yeah, hopefully that is hot enough. Maybe I should grab this with something because I have no idea how hot 44 is. I can definitely feel the heat. That's looking a lot cleaner. Look at that. Wowie zowie. Still got a little crud on it, but I think I can wipe that off. Now these are looking a ton better already. I think I am going to go ahead and run these a little bit more. I think they could still see a little bit more improvement than they have, but huge improvement on this. I'm pretty satisfied with this little parts cleaner. All right, so we are all done now. I'm gonna take this lid off. As you can see, that cleaning solution has become a nice, beautiful color brown. Set this off to the side. Now, this stuff is looking clean. I am very satisfied with the Sonic cleaner. I'm sure it has a lot to do with the solution you use. In my case, I'm using a cleaner made specifically for a Sonic cleaner. So I'm sure that has something to do with how clean this stuff is turning out, but good Lord, it looks great. Now these carbs turned out really, really well. Look at how clean that is. And this back side here is even really clean, and I just, wow. This looks good. So I'm gonna get this all dried off, and then we'll circle back. It'll be just a minute for you guys, but it's actually gonna be tomorrow for me. I'm gonna start putting these back together once they have had the chance to dry overnight. Okay, so now all of our carb parts are clean. They are looking really, really nice now. So the next step is to start reassembling this stuff. Now, when we reassemble this stuff, we are going to have to do something called recentering the jet on our carburetors. It's not very hard, it sounds complex, but it definitely isn't. And then we're also going to have to kind of preset a kind of loose setting for our mixture, which I will show you guys how to do here as well. So to start off, let's grab one of our carburetors. Now, as you can see, it's much cleaner now. It is just totally night and day. These linkages are still kind of like rusty, but they're not dirty anymore, and that is going to be a nice change of pace for this stuff. First things first, I'm going to want to put our jets, I'm going to want to screw these in to our float bowls here. Now, this process, pretty straightforward. You're going to take this little cap off of here, and then you are simply going to screw in your new jet assembly. So now that we have that done, the next thing that we're going to want to approach here are the float bowl lids. And these are also pretty simple to set up, but what I would recommend doing is taking this little needle valve here out first. Go ahead and remove that needle valve out of the receptacle. I guess I'll just call it a receptacle. You will be screwing this in by itself to avoid damaging that valve. And this is just simply a little nut doohickey mabobber there. You can see that, hopefully that's in focus. And that just gets screwed into the top of the lid. Once you've got that in, all you have to do is make sure you put this needle valve in with the black tip, the pointy end, inwards. They don't always come in the kit with that black pointy tip facing the right direction, so make sure that that's right when you put that in there. And then we've got our little like roll pin here, which we'll use to reattach our float to. So our float sits down on this right here, and then you pass this pivot joint right down this. So it looks something like that. You see that post running through there, and you're gonna use a small hammer with a punch. Be very, very gentle, and you're just gonna wanna hammer that post down in there. You are not gonna wanna beat the heck out of this thing. You just want it to set down in there nice and tidy. And now the key with this pin is just to make sure that it's pushed in there far enough to where the teeth are kind of like grabbing this one side, but you're also going to want it to not go too far out the other side to where it won't actually shut in the float bowl. So you just want to test fit that. In my case, things are looking good, no problems. All right, so now both of those float bowls are ready, and we can start reassembling this a little bit more. You'll find that it is easiest to go ahead and set your jet centering thing device. I know, super technical terms that I'm using here, but the way that this part works here is you have this brass piece here, and this brass piece is threaded on one end and then has kind of a step on one side, and this gets set right down into the bottom side of your carburetor like so. And then you are going to take your locking nut, that is the bigger nut of the two, and your brand new little like washer here, and you're gonna thread the threaded end into the carburetor. And now this is not going to be perfectly centered when you do this, and that's fine. We are going to adjust it in a little while. For right now, we just want to go ahead and get this assembled. Then you're gonna take your brand new spring, set that on there, and then take your adjustment nut, and then take the side that is flat, that doesn't have any thread on it, and that's gonna go inside that spring, and you're gonna tighten this up as well. Now what I've gone ahead and done is went ahead and tightened that all the way down. The reason I tighten that all the way down is it's important to kind of find that baseline as tight as it can go so that we can adjust it a little bit later on in the video once we've finished putting the float bowl back on and everything. All right, so next up we are going to put our float bowl back on. What I've done is I've set my red adjuster and my blue adjuster on the sides of the carburetor that they actually go on. So what I'm saying here is that the right carburetor receives the red and the left carburetor receives the blue adjustment little bracket here. And the way this goes on, pretty simply, you have a notch in your little adjuster here, and you set that onto the notch of the carburetor. Boom, just like that. Then you have the special winged washer. Gonna go ahead and set that on. That just kind of sets there. Doesn't really hold on at all. As you can see, that just fell off. And then we are going to put our bolt with our washer, as well as a new rubber gasket on this bolt. This is going to pass through your carburetor, through the side right here behind all the linkages, and then into the actual float bowl, so you can mount that up there. And that rubber is really important because it's going to help create a tight seal and prevent any gasoline or anything like that from coming out when it shouldn't. All right, and there we have it. So as you can see, that was a little bit awkward to do, and that's okay. It's just kind of part of the name of the game here. All right, so actually, in fact, I put that on wrong. So I'm not gonna edit this out. I did make a mistake here. And the way that I found out that I put this on wrong is that this hose right here, it didn't line up. Two things. There's a small bracket right here that comes down, connects to the actual jet. that wasn't lined up properly, but also when I held the float bowl perfectly level, the carburetor wasn't at enough of an angle. So I knew that because the carburetor wasn't at an angle that it was in incorrectly. So there you go. Mistakes were made, but they were also solved. So the next thing that we're gonna do here is take this bracket. So you can see this bracket right here actually connects into that actual jet. And you do that with the screw that came out of the old jet. We're gonna go ahead and screw that in. This is what's actually managing your choke as well as your idle. This is going to control all of that. All right, there we go. And now let's take a look at this a little closer. So what you can see is that as I adjust and actuate the actual choke, it's changing the depth of that jet. And that's what's actually controlling how much fuel is being delivered to the car while it's sitting at idle, for instance. So now we've got one side pretty much done from this perspective. We're gonna go ahead, repeat all the steps we just took with the other side, and then we will continue on with the jet centering process and all that other fun, good stuff. All right, so the next thing I wanted to show you guys was how exactly to center the jet on your Classic Minis carburetors. Unfortunately, what I ran into is an issue where my needle was actually bent. And the way I diagnosed that issue was, first, you have your needle, it sits in the bottom of your float bowl here. And the needle sits in the bottom of your piston that sits in the dash pot. And this right here is your needle. Now, I don't have my locking nut in there anymore, my locking bolt, I guess. Instead, I have loosened it so that I could get the needle out. Now, the way I found out the needle was bent is it was completely binded. No matter what I did to centralize that jet, it was just not allowing the piston to move up and down. Now this needle is tapered at a specific rate to allow fuel into your carburetor at a specific rate. Once I got this needle out, once I removed that locking nut, you can actually roll this needle along a flat surface. So in my case, this is not a great example because the surface isn't perfectly flat, but you can bring it into your kitchen or something on a granite countertop, linoleum, something like that. And if you roll your needle across this surface here and you get any sort of like feeling it doesn't move perfectly smooth, most likely the needle is bent and it's going to need to be replaced. Now, there is a handy dandy chart on 7 Mini Parts website that actually shows you all the different sizes of needles based on the different carburetors you have. But if you're confused at all, and don't worry if it does confuse you, it's not surprising. Needles and carburetors in this part of the carburation can be a little confusing. You can actually send an email to 7 Mini Parts and ask them for a little bit of guidance on what you need. Make sure you include your carburetor, whether your head or your valves or anything in your car has been modified, and they should be able to help point you in the right direction and recommend a needle for your setup. In my case, I got a recommendation for a new needle, and it should be popping up on the screen here. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. This is for 2 HS2 carburetors on a head that has big valves and has been ported. I also have a hot cam in there, and I've got a bigger displacement motor. So the key here is to kind of richen it up so that I can potentially get a little bit more power out of these HS2 carbs. We shall see once it goes on the dyno. Now for the time being, that's going to be it for these carburetors. I'm going to catch up with you guys in an upcoming episode and we'll finish putting these back together, but for right now, let's move out and we'll finish this episode off with changing the gasket on that fuel sender, and then the next episode will probably be like the shifter or something like that. So let's head outside to the car and I'll show you what I'm talking about. All right, so the last thing that we'll do is replace the gasket on this fuel sending unit. As you can see, it's a little cobwebby here. This fuel sending unit does the job of sending a signal to your gauge, tell you how much fuel you have in your fuel tank. And this has a long beam with a float on the end of it. And as fuel fills up your tank, it moves the float up, causing a different resistance, sending a different signal to that fuel gauge. Now, these have a tendency to leak. They have a gasket around them, and it's just kind of the name of the game with some of these old parts. And in my case, mine started leaking, and I noticed it. It's actually coming from around the top of this. It was the moment I started trying to run my motor, I saw fuel running down this. You can actually see where the fuel actually ate the paint off of the fuel tank here, at least down to the red. And then it looked like it was leaking down off of the new hoses that I put on, but in fact it was coming out of the actual fuel sender. Now, there's an easy way to empty out this fuel tank. A lot of people are like, well, dang, now I have to empty my fuel tank. And no, you don't just let it all leak out. What I would do is connect up your battery, make sure your fuel pump is connected, and it's pretty simple. You just run a hose, you take it off of your carburetors if they're up on the front there, or if you have it disconnected already, it makes it a little easier. Take that fuel line off. If you need a longer one, attach a longer fuel line and run it into an external tank. And that can collect the gas. You just flip on your fuel pump, don't start your car, just switch it to accessory, and that will allow the fuel to pump through the fuel pump and out into that container. And you just let that run until there's no fuel left in the tank, and then suddenly it's much easier to work on. Now at this point, all we're gonna do is loosen up these bolts here, pretty straightforward, and then we will replace the gasket that's in here. Now, if you're curious, the gasket that's on this fuel tank has been in here for about 6 years. So that's about how long it took before it started leaking. And on these older tanks, they use a cork gasket with holes in it. The newer tanks use a rubber seal, which is probably more recommended, but they only offer a cork version for these multiple screw-holed senders that are on the early units. All right, and so there we have our fuel sender with the little a float here on the end. So I'm gonna set that off to the side, and let's get this old crusty cork gasket off of here. Now while you're doing this, you're gonna wanna take extra care not to get any of this gasket into the fuel tank, because it could block up the fuel delivery system and make it so that your car won't run if there's no fuel getting to the front of the car. All right, and the last thing that we're gonna do now that we've put that cork gasket back on there is to go ahead and return this to its rightful place. Now, don't forget, this does need to be at the correct orientation. So that means that these posts right here, when I took it off, were actually in line with each other, up and down. So we're gonna go ahead and make sure that those go back in the correct way. All right, so you probably also saw that I took my time and I used a manual screwdriver right at the end. And the reason I did that is I don't want to over torque this. This is something that you can tear that cork gasket pretty easily if you don't take your time and you just torque the heck out of it with like an electric screwdriver. So I fixed that up. The next thing is we're gonna go ahead and fill this back up with gasoline and make sure it doesn't leak, but I'm not gonna do that on screen. Let's head back inside and go ahead and wrap this episode up. All right, so that's it for Classic Mini DIY today. Hope this video was helpful. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And I will be covering the remainder of the carburetors in an upcoming episode once those needles come in, like I said a little bit earlier. But one more reminder, there is a giveaway for these gloves going on right now. If you want to enter in to win a pack of 500 of these gloves, check the link in the description. Also, I did launch my new merch, so if you're interested in supporting the channel, you want a new t-shirt, there's lots of merch t-shirts out there. There's posters, there's hats, there's all sorts of stuff. We did just launch the Classic Mini Project Illustrated, as you can see here. And then on this side, you see a few different shirts that have been on the merch site for a little while. All the money from the merch store goes straight into the projects I do on this channel. So if you want to see me do more mini stuff or more whatever stuff, maybe there's something else you guys would like me to do, you know, head over there and support this channel. But that's it for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Until next time, enjoy those minis and motor on.